Nintendo 64 controller. This came out after the original PlayStation controller and before the DualShock, and man, we can bark about this controller all we want, but gotta admit, this thing was innovative in so many ways. Controlling a game in 3D with the analog control stick, camera control, 4-player multiplayer being standard on the console, even the trigger on the back, give your finger a cock and BAM! This was a huge leap forward for the industry, yes, but answer me this. Just what the hell is this? 3 prongs make it so you have multiple ways to play multiple games. Maybe you can hold it like this, or even this. But that means not all the buttons are readily available to the player in any of the controller holding styles. Also, the stick is garbage. This thing is just a skinny, plastic, uncomfortable piece of work that wears out too easily. Now, the Nintendo 64 controller did a lot right. It introduced Rumble with the Rumble Pack accessory. The analog stick brought us games like Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. And look at these colors. This thing is a colorblind Scout Wozniak's worst nightmare. Yep, I don't like this controller. Moving on, the Sega Saturn controller was pretty decent. Basically just an evolution of the Genesis 6 Spire shoulder buttons this time around. But Sega also introduced the 3D control pad for a few games, specifically Nights into Dreams. And this controller leads us into its immediate successor on Sega's last home console, the Sega Dreamcast controller. Yep, I don't like this controller. Now, is this controller as bad as the Nintendo 64's? Yeah, no. It actually has a layout that makes sense. Well, this stick is just not comfortable. This was still when many companies didn't realize that hard plastic on an analog stick isn't mankind's favorite thing out there. Also, why does the wire come out of the bottom? There's a groove for you to pop the cord in near the top, so that way it's pointing in the right direction, which just kind of comes off as a slight fix to a design oversight. At least the triggers were analog, which was a solid innovation. It definitely made racing games more realistic. But who could forget the VMU, the memory card with a screen displaying info with its own games to be played? But that, PlayStation's back, baby, with the PlayStation 2's all-new DualShock 2. This is the same controller, except the face buttons are now analog, which is dumb. Why do you need the triangle button to be pressure sensitive? Why? It felt like they just assumed analog inputs were the next big thing, but you don't need it for everything. Now, moving past that, we have the introduction of the Xbox brand, and with it, holy shit. Well, I can tell you first off, that was the easiest Easter egg hunt I've ever been a part of. This controller does get a number of things right. Number 1, giant f***ing Xbox logo. The Duke, as it's referred to now, is a behemoth. It's big for the sake of being big. There's no reason for it to be this way. Now it's completely usable, but it's just not that great when you get down to it. Like, what is this? Seriously. Also, the dual sticks just feel weird. Like, the left one has a large concave area, and the right one has a much smaller area, which honestly feels like it's convex. God, I need a shower. Microsoft designed a smaller controller for the Japanese market that made its way over to the States later down the line, and this is much more reasonable. I can actually get behind this one. It just feels much better. Everything actually makes sense this time. After Nintendo wouldn't stop laughing for 5 years straight, they really cleaned up their act with the GameCube controller. This thing is pure comfort. It just feels right in the hands. The button layout is definitely different compared to every other controller, and while I prefer the more traditional design, this layout makes a lot of sense. The main face button you'd probably use in most games is A, so why not have everything orbit around it? The triggers are crazy satisfying to click down, and the left stick is leagues better than the Nintendo 64 one. I love this controller, but while it's one of my favorites, it does have some gross parts. The D-pad and C-stick were made for ants, and the lack of another shoulder button is a bit off. Regardless, the GameCube controller has definitely stood the test of time. These pesky wires, man. What is this, the year 2000? That's where the Wavebird comes in, a wireless variant of the controller. It uses radio frequency to transmit the wireless signals. Wireless controllers were around for a while, but most used IR, like a TV remote. You had to keep them pointed to the adapter for them to function properly. But all you had to do with the Wavebird was match up the dials on the controller and the adapter, and you're all set. While it wasn't the first wireless controller, I'd argue it's the first truly great one. You can go all around the room with it, and it works perfectly. The only main downside compared to going wired is that it doesn't include rumble and it takes batteries. Was the GameCube C-Stick not small enough for you? Well, do I have a bad controller for you? Introducing the GameStop branded wireless GameCube controller. Too small and uncomfortable for any of you with hands out there. The analog stick keeps with the tried and true tradition of hard plastic. Make sure you hate it even more, and the buttons reek of loud plastic cheap. Also, it's been reported that if you do touch a controller like this, you will most definitely contract bed bugs. Damn it. Wireless was truly the next step for controllers. We make our way to the Xbox 360, which has one of the most acclaimed controllers of all time. I mean, there was nowhere to go but up after this thing, but everything is just so finely tuned and makes for a perfectly balanced controller. minus the D-pad. Microsoft later released 360 controllers with this transforming D-pad where you can have it like a traditional one or go back to this garbage. Personally, I have no clue why you'd want anything other than the more traditional D-pad, but I don't care, this thing is fun to twiddle with. Next up, the PS3 controller. Jesus Christ, guys, it's been over 10 years at this point, and you still haven't moved on? To be fair, Sony was set to go with an all-new design for the PS3 standard controller. I've never been so happy to see this design come back. The 6-axis controller was there for the first few years of the PlayStation 3's life and was basically the DualShock again, but now wireless with motion control capabilities and no rumble. Sony later released the traditional DualShock 3, rumble and motion controls included. Now everything was going pretty smoothly with controllers at this point. The 360 really hit it out of the park, the PS3 was going with a time-tested design, and Nintendo... Yeah, the PS3 controller may have had some motion controls, but the Wii Remote thought embraced them. There are definitely things I love and hate about this controller. When it works, it really works. When it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. We only have a D-pad on the remote with a few buttons on the front and a trigger on the back. It may seem limiting, but the controller was smartly designed to be usable in a multitude of ways. Like a TV remote, on its side like an old school NES controller, with the nunchuck attachment that actually gives you a stick, or inside a countless supply of plastic I really admire how creative they got with uses for the Wii Remote. But I'm not gonna lie and say this thing is a great controller. The sideways control method isn't my favorite. I'm just not a huge fan of this D-pad or these buttons. And like I said, the motion controls are definitely hit and miss. However, Nintendo did release the Wii Motion Plus add-on and the Wii Remote Plus to enhance the motion capabilities. And I gotta say, with these, I'd say the Wii Remote is pretty alright. Motion is pretty accurate now, and when used properly, it can be a really fun controller. But if you're more into the traditional side of things, might I suggest the Wii Classic controllers. They plug into the bottom just like a nunchuck and forgot how decent these things really were. The original is quite derivative of a Super Nintendo controller, but includes some modern additions like two sticks that are way too close together, and buttons I like to refer to as, you call these triggers? There's also this mystery button on the top, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this was ever used and still